everyone. Welcome to the DePaul CDM Colloquium. Today we have Professor Yayue Pan from University of Illinois at Chicago. She's an assistant professor at the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. She has had a stellar career. And I think off the record, she was up for tenure this year, and congratulations in advance. Well, she got her PhD University of Southern California, and her specialty is actually additive manufacturing using multi-materials and multifunctional materials. So think of this as like cutting-edge 3D printing. Right? It's not the hobby 3D printing that we do, but this is like at the edge of research where you combine different types of material with different mechanical properties to get like different kind of characteristics. Applications are numerous, so I'm not going to spoil the talk for you, but Dr. Pan's going to discuss that in detail. But before joining as a faculty in University of Illinois at Chicago, she's worked as an engineer in 3D systems, and she has won a number of awards, including the Outstanding Paper Award in the 41st MME Conference, Honorable Mention Paper in the 8th International Conference on Micromanufacturing, 2017 SME Outstanding Young Manufacturer Engineer Award, 2017 University of Illinois at Chicago, University of College of Engineering Faculty Research Award, and multiple awards from National Science Foundation. So I, for one, is very excited to see what the latest research in this research area, and please, you're all welcome to Dr. Pan.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming to my talk. So I will introduce some of my recent research and also ongoing research in the field of multi-material additive manufacturing. So, multi-material additive manufacturing, why do we need it? Actually, in the nature, most of the objects are made of multiple materials. For example, like this blood vessel. It's not a simple elastic tube. It's made of different tissues, cells, and fibers, muscles. So, and it can also be viewed as a three-layer structure. For example, the outer layer is made of fibers aligning on the cross-section and loose tissues. And the middle layer is made of smooth cells and fibers aligning parallel to the tube. And the inner layer is made of a single layer of cells with an even surface. Another example is the human tooth. The outer layer is also multi-layer structure. The outer layer is animal, and it's a hard layer working as a protective surface. And beneath it is dentin, which is a hard bone layer. And in the center is pulp, which is much softer and working as a way to provide nutrients and sensitivity. And the mollusk shell is another well-known example. It's also multiple layer structures which contains fibers aligning along different directions in different layers, and also a polymer composite matrix. And there are many other examples with much more complicated material systems and complicated structures, like the flower, which has dynamic properties and can change its shape according to different lighting condition or humidity and so on. And not just in nature, actually in industry, we have to combine multiple materials in order to make products functional. For example, like the battery, it can also be viewed as a multiple layer structure. It has anode, electrolyte, cathode, which have very different electrochemical properties. And other products like wearable electronics and robots, and even some products which we see more often in daily life, like the tires, remote controllers, and so on. All of them, they need different materials to be combined in order to achieve some function. However, the traditional manufacturing techniques are not designed for processing multiple materials at one time to make a multi-material products. For example, like the net shape processes such as the molding or casting, they can only process one single material to make an object. And the subjective processes such as cutting, milling, they can only remove materials from a block of material, which is also single material. So, all of them, almost all those traditional techniques, they can only process materials from the same category, either polymer or metal or ceramics, and also materials in the same form, either in liquid form or in solid block form or in filament, and so on. And additive manufacturing, compared to those traditional techniques, additive manufacturing is a relatively new manufacturing technology. It is a class of manufacturing technologies that build a 3D object by adding layers of material one at a time to build the 3D object usually from the bottom to the top. And it's also known as 3D printing or direct digital manufacturing. So in my talk, I refer to the additive manufacturing by AM in short, so just for convenience. So additive manufacturing, probably you know this one the best. Is the most popular desktop 3D printing technology. But actually, it has many other different techniques also considered as additive manufacturing technology, and not just the extrusion-based process. For example, like the fat photopolymerization-based process, which use liquid resin as the feedstock and use the UV light to solidify the liquid resin through photopolymerization to make a 3D object. And the jetting-based process. So this is actually a 3D printing version of the 2D inkjet printing machine. So you use inkjet print head to jet inks on the platform layer by layer, and then solidify them to build a 3D object from the bottom to the top. And there are some other processes considered as additive manufacturing processes, such as the sintering-based process. So you have a tank of powder. It can be polymer powder or metal powder or even some ceramic powders, and use high-power laser to sinter the powder to solidify them, to melt them, and then connect those powders together to build a 3D object in a layer-by-layer way. So therefore, intuitively, in additive manufacturing, if you can deposit different materials in one layer and bond those multiple materials together to form a layer, and then stack layers together, you can make a multi-material object from the bottom to the top, layer by layer. So actually, the two technologies, the extrusion-based technology and the jetting-based technology, have been commercialized for multi-material printing. So the extrusion-based process, you use multiple extruders to extrude different filaments. And the jetting-based process, you can jet multiple materials on the platform, right? So I think you all know it. So they have been used for fabricate assembly-free prototypes, which have very realistic shape, color, and even very realistic mechanical properties. However, they are still limited to the same form of materials. So for example, here you can only process filaments, or here you can only process liquid ink, or the same category of materials. So both commercialized technologies, they can only fabricate polymer plus polymer multi-material object. They cannot fabricate polymer plus metal or polymer plus ceramic or some other multi-material objects. So why is it difficult? There are many challenges. First of all, it's difficult to distribute different forms of materials because the influences of the size and geometry on the material distribution and the material control are very significant. You can imagine if you have nanotubes, nanofibers, and particles or liquid resin, then how to distribute those two very different materials? They are totally totally different distribution mechanism. And even if you can distribute materials, different materials in the desired regions accurately, but still it's harder to bind them together because those materials, they have very different physical properties and they need different solidification mechanisms. For example, maybe the filament, it needs to use the thermal effect to solidify it, but the liquid resin, it needs photopolymerization to solidify it. So they have different solidification mechanisms. And even if you can solidify them and bind them, the interfacial strength is still very weak. And it's hard to locally control the material distribution, solidification, and the binding to achieve the desired resolution and accuracy or the repeatability. So that's why till today, you still see just the two commercialized multi-material additive manufacturing techniques, and they are still limited to the polymer. So in my group, our research focused on the multi-material additive manufacturing process innovation. So we targeted to develop novel manufacturing processes or modify the existing additive manufacturing processes by integrating multiple physics to manipulate, solidify, or accumulate the materials. And the target application is to fabricate smart materials and devices, for example, like the soft robots or some energy storage and management materials and devices. So, so in my talk, I will mainly talk about the first one, field-assisted projection stereolithography. And if we have enough time, I'll go through the next two, the selective melting and direct ink writing for the multi-material manufacturing. Okay, so field-assisted projection stereolithography is based on the projection stereolithography. I think some of you already know what it is, but let me quickly review it. So same as all 3D printing process, we start from a digital model, CAD model, and then we slice it into a set of 2D layers. Each layer is saved as a .bmp, black-white image for the projection stereolithography. And the black and white image is projected from, by a projector, something like that, the same projector we can even use, or a UV light projector. And then the projector projects the image to the liquid resin here. And when the liquid resin is exposed to the light, to the white light, because the light energy is so strong, the photosensitive liquid resin gets solidified through photopolymerization reaction. Then in this way, you can use the image to define the geometry of that layer and solidify a layer with that geometry. And then you can build those layers one by one and stack them to make a 3D object. So in this process, the feedstock is, the feedstock is the liquid resin. Imagine that if you add particles or some other functional fillers into the liquid resin and use the suspension as the feedstock, then you can fabricate composites or some other multi-material objects. And if you use external field to control the functional filler distribution in the liquid resin, then you can achieve some heterogeneous properties or make some complicated multi-material objects. So we will talk about it in detail later on. Okay, so in our research, because we have to control the process settings carefully, so we have to build the prototype machine ourselves. We cannot use the commercial machine because in a commercial machine you have little control on the process. And in this project, we added an external magnetic field to control the functional filler. So with an external magnetic field, we can form the particles into a chain structure like what shows here. So initially, it's nano-sized or micron-sized particles. And with a magnetic field, you can assemble those particles into chain-like structures. And you can manipulate the particle chain orientation with the external magnetic field. And with the external magnetic field, we can form the chains with different dimensions and also different orientations as shown here. And with different loading fractions of the particles, you can form chains with different sizes and different densities in the liquid resin as well. And okay, so we found that with the magnetic field density increasing, we can increase the chain length. But however, the chain widths will kind of like decrease. But we still need to do more systematic and more comprehensive statistical study about the relationship between the chain dimensions with the magnetic field strength. And not just with a static magnetic field, we can use a moving magnetic field to attract a droplet of magnetic particles. So in this photo, the yellow region is liquid resin, and the dark region, the dark droplet, is MR fluid, so magnetoroyological fluid. So it contains micron-sized magnetic particles, and we can analyze, we can model the magnetic force applied on the MR fluid droplet. So by using a moving magnetic field, we can attract this droplet, magnetic droplet, and draw a pattern in the liquid resin. So starting from the droplet, we can form much more complicated particle patterns, distribution patterns, such as the line here and the T-letter here or the cross here, and some other complicated patterns. And we can also analyze the magnetic particle pattern size and the particle moving velocity in the liquid resin by considering the dragging force in the liquid moving process, in the particle flow process, and also the magnetic force in the process. And here are some samples. So by repeatedly move the droplet and draw the pattern, you can achieve very accurate and very dense particle patterns in the liquid resin, and you can solidify it through photopolymerization, such as those patterns, the cross line and the ring, half ring patterns. And you can see the microstructure of those patterns. You can see that in the inside of the pattern, particle distribution pattern, the particles are formed into chains, and you have some certain chain orientation. So with the loading fractions of the particles changed, you can also change the magnetic particle patterns as well. And with the static magnetic field and the moving magnetic field, you can achieve 3 levels of material complexity. The first level is uniformly distributed particles in a polymer matrix. So then you can, as illustrated in that schematic drawing, so then you can fabricate homogeneous composites. So this is very easy, right? But the second level, you can achieve unidirectional structural chains. So in this way, you can fabricate anisotropic composite. But however, in this level, you still have constant material composition. So the third level is that we want to change the material composition and control the material composition locally, so you can fabricate something more complicated. So like what's shown here, a circle pattern in the polymer matrix. So here I showed some microscopic images of the composite, uniform composite, and the level 1 unidirectional structural composite. And we can model the magnetic properties of those composites by considering the manufacturing process parameters, such as the magnetic field intensity that we used, and the material properties like the liquid viscosity, particle size, those parameters. And we can predict some magnetic properties, such as the trigger conditions. Here, the trigger distance here, D, which is defined as the critical distance that you need in order to actuate a composite sample. So we can predict it by the magnetorheological properties of the suspensions we used, the feedstock I'm talking about that we used. So, okay, and we found that with different patterns, we will have very different magnetic properties. So I'm not going to details about it. So the magnetic flux density, for example, it is dependent on the loading fraction and the particle chain orientation, those things. And the distribution patterns, which what we taught before, including the particle chain orientation and the distribution pattern, either a half circle or a line or across the pattern, it influences the magnetic flux density. But what's the exact influence? It's difficult to quantify it. There's still no physics to do it yet. We can only use simulation to understand it. And of course, the mechanical properties of the resulted of the printed part is highly dependent on the directions, the particle chain directions, and also the particle distributions. So we have a few papers published in this field. For modeling the magnetic properties and the mechanical properties. But I'm going to talk about one test case only here. Yes, question.
So you sliced in horizontal layers.
Yes.
And is it correct to think that the chains are all within the horizontal layer? Or do you end up with chains sort of with a vertical?
That's a great question. It depends on your process. So actually, in this system that I presented, you can only orient the particle chains in one layer. But we have another project going on, which is a modified version of the magnetic field assisted process. You can align chains vertically between layers in the adjacent layers. Yeah, but that's much more complicated, and we don't have publications yet, so I'm not talking it here. So, okay. All right, so with the manufacturing technique, we can fabricate many different things and for different applications. And the multi-material robot is one of our applications that we investigated. Of course, we are not robot experts, so if you have any criticism about robot design, please forgive me. We are working on the manufacturing part only. So, but anyway, by observing the inchworm in the nature, we designed a robot like this, shown in the illustrative figure. So, in this figure, the transparent green represents soft material, which is elastic polymer, and the gray part is hard material. It is particle polymer composite. In a schematic drawing, it seems that they are just two parts, but actually, in the design, we have the adjacent area. So let's block with the body, the soft body, the adjoining area. We have gradient material distribution. And okay, so our goal is to actuate this soft robot by using external magnetic field, and then achieve the same locomotion as the inchworm. So we want to have this robot. Has multi-material continuum multi-material composition with spatially fluid stiffness. So in order to achieve this goal, we have to locally engineer the material composition, including the filler, loading fraction, and the orientation. And we also need to find the relationship between the material composition and the orientation with the mechanical and the mechanical properties. And we also want to achieve untethered control by using magnetic field. So we need to find out the magnetic properties of the fabricated robot with the given design. And in addition to that, for the the anterior foot and the front foot, we want to have some like spiked structures, such as shown here, something like the setae of the the natural organisms. And for the spike, so this small spike, the green part is shown here. So if we look at it in details, the material composition, we want it to have gradient material composition. So the tip is more elastic, which means it contains more polymer, and the bottom is more magnetic responsive, so it contains more iron oxide particles, magnetic particles. So for this static-like structure, it's multiple scale, so it should contain from nanometer to micrometer features. And the reason we designed it this way is because we want to have some high adhesion but low friction on different surfaces. So okay, so this is the fabricated robot, and as you can see, is around like 6 centimeters long, and the width is about 5 millimeters wide. And if you look at the bottom surface of the foot, you can see that under a microscope, you can see that it has a spike array. And if you look a single spike, you can see that on the spike surface, it has crease, very uniform crease. The width between the crease width is around like 2 micrometers. And if you look at the bottom more carefully, you'll see that it contains nanometers holes. So with those features, we also analyze the chemical composition. So you can see that the spectrum 1, which is the bottom of the spike, it contains more iron. So it's because we have more iron oxide particles contained. And the tip, it has less iron oxide particles, so that the tip, it can be more soft. So, okay, so let me show you some figures. Okay, so this is just a simple demonstration of the fabricated robot moving, crawling inside of a tube. And we can mimic the 5 positions, deformation positions of the inchworm to achieve the locomotion of the inchworm. And we can also turn it by bend it by different angles. And we demonstrated by using printed long model and move it around the different branches. So in those 2 videos, the magnetic field that we used is only 2 MT. So in the medical applications, if you consider MRI, so the magnetic field strength is much higher. It's like 1.5 to 10 T. So it's totally safe here. And with the multiple scale feature of the foot, you can have different hydrophobic properties and also have different adhesive forces on different surfaces. And it's good for control the robot on different surfaces. So for example, this is a chicken skin tissue. So we have a pig stomach, and we bought a pig stomach, and then we controlled the controlled the robot inside of the pig stomach, and we also tested the robot on the chicken skin tissue, and this is to test the ability of deliver liquid drug to the desired location in the pig stomach here. So you see the red pigment. That's the drug that we used here to demonstrate its capability. So we also test other surfaces like a wet surface or some very rough surface to test its locomotion capability. And in addition to that, the multiple scale feature of the foot, we found that it has unique benefit for cell growth and cell attachment. So this is a comparison of the flat foot pad and the spiked foot pad. So compared to, and in those 4 pictures, the green dots are cells, fluorescent cells. And okay, in the first 6 hours, we we put some cells on the surface, and in the first 6 hours, we image them. You can see that there's no big difference. And after 72 hours, you can see that in this surface, in the spiked footpad surface, it has much more cells than the flat surface. So we conclude that the spiked footpad, the multiple scale spiked footpad, it provided a much better environment for cells to grow and to attach and to grow. And we did some quantitative analysis and found that the spiked footpad has about like 250% more cells growth on it. And we can also add some additional features to a robot. For example, like this gripper here, or and for the gripper, we can also design the material distribution to achieve different magnetic properties for gripping and removing capabilities. And we can also modify the foot by modifying it to a container and use it for store the liquid resin, not liquid resin, liquid jug. And we can design its structure and its material properties in a way that we can release the liquid jug when it's needed, when an external magnetic field is applied. So let me demonstrate 2 videos here. So first video is with a human stomach model. We controlled the robot by using the external magnetic field and move it to the desired region and release the jug. And the second video, it shows that we can move the robot inside of a tube and then grab something or remove something in the tube. So we found that the robot can carry liquid jug, which is about 6% of its own volume. So it's due to the size of the container we designed. And it can also grab objects, which is like 5 times of its own weight. So in addition to magnetic field, we can also consider other fields to be integrated into the manufacturing process, such as the acoustic field. So compared to magnetic field, the acoustic field has many advantages. So for the magnetic field process, you can only control particles, which is magnetic, right? Of course, if the particles is something that has no magnetic it's not magnetic, you can coat it to make it magnetic. But that's kind of difficult, challenging, or time-consuming. But the acoustic force, it doesn't have any requirements on the physical properties of the particles. So you can control almost any particles. And it's easy to integrate into the manufacturing system because you just need some piezoelectric plates. And you can use it for sorting or separating particles. So this is an animation of the manufacturing process, the acoustic field assisted projection stereolithography process. So those 4 plates, are acoustic plates, so piezoelectric plates. And the transparent green thing is liquid resin, and those are particles. So okay, we also built the platform, and we studied different liquid resin with different viscosities and different particles with size in a very large range, from 70 nanometer, like the tungsten particles, to like 100 microns, like the copper particles. And by the way, for the acoustic field assisted process, its limitation is the particle loading fraction. It's difficult to control suspensions with very high loading fractions. So the loading fraction we tested is around like 3% in weight ratio. So in the process, actually the dominant force is the acoustic radiation force. So this force, it drives the particles to the pressure nodes. So then in this way, you align particles into some parallel lines or parallel curves. And of course, during the process, the particles also experience like gravity or Stokes drag force. So by considering those forces, you can model and predict the particle pattern in the manufacturing process. So by controlling the piezo element configuration and other process parameters like liquid viscosity, loadings, you can achieve different particle patterns as shown here. And okay, so the top 4 are just illustration, and the bottom 4 are microscopic images of some samples. So, some applications of this process is that because instead of complicated patterns, it can only achieve parallel lines or parallel curves or just a combination of them. You cannot achieve complicated patterns such as the letters, as you've seen in the magnetic field assisted process. So this process, its application is more about like pattern particles into networks or into some like line structures. So one application we investigated is a composite with interconnected networks, particle networks for thermal management. So here, this part is uniform composite, particle polymer composite, and this part is patterned composite, which contains patterned particle lines as shown in this microscopic image. So you can see that in the uniform composite, particles are kind of like uniformly dispersed in the polymer matrix, and in the patterned particle lines, in some regions, like those regions, is pure polymer almost, and it has connected particles between the layers. So in this way, you can form some thermoconductive lines or networks inside of the part, or even you can form 3D networks for thermal management. And if you can control the particle line accurately and achieve a high loading fraction, you can even make electrolyte conductive wire as shown in this photo. So the white color, the transparent color is polymer, and the black color is conductive wire made of copper, I believe it's copper powders. So you can also manipulate cells using this technique for bioprinting. Okay, so I think I still have 10 minutes. I'll go quickly, go through the direct ink writing quickly, and have just 1 minute for the selective melting. So direct ink writing, it is a very simple manufacturing process. It uses a syringe usually, and you use pneumatic pressure or mechanical pressure to control the extrusion of material from the syringe tip. So you extrude liquid ink on the platform, and you use some mechanism like chemical reaction or thermal or heat or some other mechanisms to solidify the extruded ink on the platform and then make a 3D object. So compared to other processes, it's more flexible in terms of the material choices. So it can use liquid material, of course, but it can also extrude solid material or nanoparticle suspensions. So it has been investigated for batteries printing or some electronics printing. So for example, here is 3D interdigited electrodes printed by the direct ink writing process. And in the literature, most of the research focused on printing the electrodes using this method, or printing the solid-state electrolytes. And for printing the solid-state electrolytes, usually they need post-processing, and the post-processing will result in like shrinkage or distortion, many problems. So for 3D printing a whole battery cell, the electrolyte printing is actually the bottleneck. So our goal is to find a way to print electrolyte directly onto electrodes without any post-treatment. So in order to achieve this goal, you need to consider the rheological properties of your ink so that it's extrudable and you can also stack it on the platform. And you also need to consider the electrochemical properties, of course, in order to make the electrolyte working, right? And of course, you also need to consider the interfacial properties of the to make sure you have a good interfacial strength between the electrolyte and the electrode. So we collaborated with another group at UIC and developed a new ink, a hybrid electrolyte ink. So this ink is a porous polymer matrix, and it contains the lithium ion conducting ionic liquid inside of it. And we also added some titanium oxide nanoparticles into it to modify its viscosity and its conducting properties. And we can adjust the temperature, the nozzle temperature and the platform temperature to print it and solidify it and stack it on the platform. And by controlling the temperature, we can achieve different viscosities and also different modulus. And by controlling the nanoparticle loading fractions, we can achieve different contact angles. So then in this way, if we make, for example, if we set temperature, extruding temperature at 120 Celsius degree, the ink is more like a liquid, so you can print it out, you can extrude it out. And the platform, if its temperature is around like 25 Celsius degree, the ink will have a smaller storage modulus and it will behave more like a solid, so then you can stack the material together. So, and the inks with the nanoparticles, it can have different stacking contact angles so that you can control the shape of the trace that you wrote on the platform or the previous layer to achieve the desired accuracy and the resolution. And we developed the prototype machine as well, and here are some examples that we printed. So for example, here this is electrolyte printed on the hemispherical surface. And this is another structure, which is net structure, and it has self-supporting features. So it's a 3D scaffold that also we printed with the electrolyte ink. And if you observe the material more closely, the printed material more closely, you will see that actually between the electrode and the printed electrolyte, we can have two different layers. One layer is a dense layer, which is close, which is adhering to the electrode surface. And then in the center is porous layer. So this is because the formation of the two layers of electrolyte. But okay, by the way, we printed the whole thing in one layer, but by controlling the material composition, the ink formation, we can achieve such a two-layer structure. So a dense layer and a porous layer. So this is because the electrolyte ink, it contains the copolymer, which is a copolymer of the electrode, sorry. And we also tested the performance of the batteries and found that the batteries with the 3D printed electrolyte, it has a higher charge-discharge rate and a better performance. And we also fabricated a whole cell battery and tested its performance. So those are two samples. This is a simple interdigited cell, and this is a full cell with the Hilbert curved structure. And so those structures, it shows that the capability and potential for complicated batteries. So this is an ongoing research project. So we are working on identifying the material process performance relationship, and in order to fabricate the full battery cell with higher performance and with higher throughput. So, okay, so the last one, self-binded selective melting. Different with the direct ink writing and projection stereolithography, which are using polymer as the matrix material. In this self-selective melting, we can do anything. We can do polymer, we can do metal, we can do anything in the powder form. So in this project, this project is collaborated with a company, a local company, Allcell. So it's a company in Chicago. It's working on the battery packaging. And this company came to us and asked us if we can develop some additive manufacturing 3D printing techniques for fabricating the material or the battery package that they designed. So, okay, batteries, it has the heat issue is a big problem in the batteries. So the heat generation, it will cause like the battery performance degradation and the capacity fade. And also it may cause some thermal runaway issues. So the solution from this company or cell company is that we can package the battery cells by using some phase change materials. So this phase change material is a composite. It contains paraffin wax as a phase change material, and the graphene, the expanded graphite as a thermal conductive material. So this is the product fabricated by this company. So as you can see here, it has holes in the center, and you can insert cell batteries into those holes. So then in this way, you can maintain the temperature at a certain level for those batteries. So this material is developed by this company, and they already have the products. They can fabricate it themselves. But however, they have a big problem, which is the material waste. So the way they fabricate it is that they do press, soak, and then cutting, and the drilling, not cutting. So, okay, during this process, they have a big material waste, which can be up to like 80%. And also, the fabrication cycle is very long. They need like days to fabricate the product. So, of course, if you don't change the design, then it's okay. But if you change the design, or if you want to do some quick test, then the fabrication time is an issue. So that's why they think about additive manufacturing. So then we think, okay, we probably can investigate the selective melting or selective sintering process to process a mixture of the expanded graphite powder and the paraffin wax powder. So because the paraffin wax, it has a low melting temperature, and the expanded graphite has a very high melting temperature. So we can use the laser, a very low power laser, to melt the paraffin wax. And the molten paraffin wax, it works as a binder to bind the expanded graphite powders together. Then we can make the composite. So this is the prototype machine. And as you see here, those are loose powders. But in the center, you can see a square here. So this is the sintered layer. So if you do it layer by layer way, we can stack layers to make a block of composite. So this is what we fabricated. Of course, if you control your laser path, then you can fabricate different geometries, composite with different geometries, like this geometry or this geometry. Now in this way, you don't need to fabricate a block of composite material and drill it. You can just fabricate this structure directly to save the material. So this additive manufacturing process is okay. It can fabricate complex geometries, and it can achieve high accuracy and speed and almost nearly zero material waste. But but there are still some problems. So a big issue here is the binding between the graphite powder and the paraffin wax powder, because you melt the paraffin wax powder to bind the expanded graphite powders together. So when it's heated, then it's kind of like loose. The binding is kind of like loose. So it will have some leaking issue. But anyway, we fabricated samples and tested its performance, the latent heat capacity, for example, and mechanical properties, and found that most of the properties are okay. So there's the electrical resistivity and the thermal conductivity are okay. So for some applications, we can use the 3D printed paraffin expanded graphite composite directly. So due to the time limits, I'm not going to details about it. So okay, so conclusion is that we found that the material, the composite made by the traditional technique in the company, it can achieve a little bit quicker heat transfer across the specimen, because the thermal conductivity is a little bit higher, because you have the press to make the binding stronger than the 3D printed material. But the 3D printed material has a higher latent heat capacity, which means that it can store more heat than the traditionally made material. So this is also an ongoing project. We are still collaborating with the company, and we aim to commercialize this technology in the end. So okay, so I don't think I have much time. So in the end, I would like to acknowledge my students. So those work are done by my students, PhD students, and some graduate students, and funded by NSF and companies like Orcel and also our college. All right, thank you.
Questions from the audience?
Yes.
I wanted to ask more about the robotic worm.
Okay.
Drug delivery.
Yes.
There's drugs on the market now that do need targeted delivery inside tissues. Are you looking to advance that more, like to carry more of a drug, or to make it possible to move on even more tissues?
So you are talking about remove some tissues?
No, like to deliver like a higher dose.
Uh-huh.
Are you looking to evolve that worm robot more to be able to do more like that?
Okay, so we don't have expertise for that, but I will be happy to collaborate with some other groups, like groups from like robot design, or from the like bioengineering department, or from the medical school. So it's kind of like interdisciplinary work, right? So I think we need collaboration in order to do that. But of course, that's a very good direction. That's the reason that we tested is biocompatibility. So in one of the slides, I showed the cell attachment and cell growth, right? So at least it's possible because our material is biocompatible. Yeah. Yes.
So my question follows the first one. That targeted delivery, how small can you make that inch-form like robot for targeted delivery?
Oh, okay. So for the robot, we fabricated it. It's 5 millimeter wide. So the reason we designed it 5 millimeter wide is because we found that most human organisms, or the pathway, is like bigger, a little bit bigger than 5 millimeters. So that's the reason. But if you want to make it small, we can make it smaller. So as you can see that we can make features like micron scale features, or even nanometer scale features.
It's,
yeah.
Good for brain vessels, yeah?
It's
not possible.
For brain vessels, I think that's challenging. yeah. But we can make it micron size with this technique. But if you consider other techniques, which can achieve like nanometer resolution, like 100 nanometer resolution, then you can make much smaller robots. Yeah.
Nanometer, again, magnetic field for?
So actually, that's one of our projects working on right now. So we are working on like integrate magnetic field or acoustic field into the nanometer resolution 3D printing technology, which is known as 2-photon nano printing. So, but there are many issues there. It's still challenging. Yeah.
Next question. Is there any negative effect of electromagnetic field for tissue?
That I don't know, but I think it should be fine because the magnetic field intensity we used here is MT level. And if you consider the MRI is magnitude of order higher. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that robot has two different materials.
Yeah, it has two different materials, but also in the robot you have different concentrations. It doesn't have to be like one material here and another material there. You can have gradient material composition.
Yeah, I was to ask about this, the material composition and the orientation. So how did you determine?
You mean how we design it?
Yeah.
Okay, so in order to identify the proper material distribution for achieving the desired locomotion or the desired mechanical properties, we first have a rough estimation and then run finite element analysis to analyze its mechanical properties like the elasticity, and then see if it can achieve the desired like the bending angle or the deformation angle, and then do this like multiple runs to find the optimal distribution. But I think it cannot be called as optimal, but it's proper. Yeah. So the key method there is finite element analysis. Mm-hmm.
Any questions? Okay, I have.
Yes.
A couple. So the robot has like two magnets, right?
Yes.
So how do you control both separately at the same time? Or how do you, I mean, you should control one first and like interchange?
Oh, okay. So, so the two magnets, one is for controlling the front leg, and another is to control the anterior leg, right? So, and then what we do is that we fix one magnet first, and then move another one.
Okay.
So it's kind of like one is work as an anchor.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the mechanism is basically you have like 2-3 magnets mounted far away, right? And then you concentrate one for, all right.
Right,
Okay.
right. So here we just use two.
Okay.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be direct contact. It can be beneath the substrate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another question I have is, now you talked about this robot,
Mm-hmm.
small, like mini-scale robots crawling inside your body and these
Mm-hmm.
drugs. Can it be like made to like degrade? So you just let it go inside and
okay.
it just dissolve itself after delivering the drug? Is that a possibility?
And then the polymer matrix, you can choose some biodegradable polymer. But one thing is that you also need to consider the elasticity of the polymer.
Okay.
So I didn't look at that, but my concern is that maybe if it has a good biodegradable property, then its elasticity is not that ideal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And if it's dissolved, then the nanoparticles we need to consider how to.
Dispose.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question I had was in the middle of the talk you said that the physics is unknown for this process of like determining the composition And you said
It's
that-
not completely known.
Understood.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So have you thought about applying maybe AI or some machine learning techniques to with the knowledge you have, and then maybe come up with a system to predict some of the properties?
So we are actually collaborating with another colleague. He is working on something like AI, and but that's for determining the optimal material distribution. For this, we haven't done that because it's different between the computer science or computer engineering department with the mechanical engineering department. In mechanical engineering department, we don't consider the conclusions from AI as the knowledge.
Yes, yes.
We always want to know the physics.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
this-
we always do some like finite element analysis or CFD or physical modeling, those things.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand. Because the reason I asked is that because we had a talk like recently
Mhm.
from Argonne University, because they are doing a lot of this material, finding this material,
Yeah.
how the materials can change the properties and all. So they have been using these AI systems to successfully predict some of the material properties.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, I think AI may be a good tool, but one issue there is it's not just the discipline difference. It's also there's also a practical issue. In order to use AI, you have to have a big experimental data set, and to collect that data is really difficult. And also in research, there are so many noises. And so many different manufacturing process parameters and also material parameters. So kind of like difficult to collect the proper data set with the controllable noises. Mm-hmm.
If the audience doesn't have a question, I have another one. Have you thought about creating multi-limbed robots? Right now you have like a worm, right? Have you
Right.
thought about making like a leg robot
Yeah,
at
yeah,
that scale?
yeah.
Is that possible, or if that's possible, can it be controlled like a worm, like to achieve locomotion?
What do you mean?
Like
Can you?
so right
Yeah.
now you have a worm,
Yeah.
say like a walking
Oh.
robot with like
Oh,
legs.
okay, I see. Okay, you are talking about have multiple
Yes,
worms
limbs, yes.
and then control them together.
Yes.
I think that would be a more control problem
Yeah,
instead
but
of
the
manufacturing
process allows
problem.
you to make something like that, right?
Yeah, if you can give me that design,
Okay.
then
make it.
we can test our manufacturing capability.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
All right.
Okay,
One last chance. No questions?
okay.
All right, then let's thank the.
Thank you.
Professor Pan once
Thank
again
you.
for the exciting talk.